Start recording? Perfect. My name is Mike Bevilacqua. I'm the Vice President of the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome you all to the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce Annual Energy and Environmental Conference. We have a very great speakers today, including a keynote speaker, Undersecretary of Mass Energy and Environmental Affairs, Undersecretary Judy Chang. I want to welcome the Undersecretary to the call. We also have Roger Cranenburg from Eversource, Joe Muraco with National Grid, and Matt Hammer from Revise Inc. We'll hear from all of them very shortly. I want to thank our title sponsor for today, Eversource, our program sponsors, the Merrimack Valley Chamber Means Business Program and National Grid, and as well as Revise Inc. Without them, we couldn't do programs like this today, so I want to thank all of our sponsors for today. I also want to mention that the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce is very tightly associated with energy and environmental affairs. Years back, the Merrimack Valley Chamber had a pilot program for the state of Massachusetts. We had an energy and environmental program. What we did is we worked with an energy company. We would go into different businesses throughout the Merrimack Valley, perform energy audits on those businesses. They range anywhere from a school to a military defense company to a small business, a restaurant, and we did these energy audits. Collectively, the companies in this program, which is around 43 companies, would save $30+ million over the next 30 years in energy upgrades. And we believe it's very important to continue to push the message of energy and environmental affairs to our members of the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce and the whole business community in the Merrimack Valley. And that's why we want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for our annual Energy and Environmental Conference. With that being said, I want to turn it over to our keynote speaker for this morning, Undersecretary Judy Chang, and welcome to the Merrimack Valley Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you today. And Mike, I did prepare a few slides to just guide our conversation, but certainly welcome any opportunities to have a dialogue. It's a pleasure to join you all and to have the opportunity to talk about some of the major initiatives and accomplishments that have taken place in the Commonwealth over this last year. While it's been a challenging year, we did not stop working on energy and environmental issues while we transitioned in work style and work locations. I joined the administration in June of 2020. At the time we thought that working from home was only a month or 2 months kind of a situation, but I've been working from home since and met all of my colleagues, most of my colleagues through these kinds of formats. So as I said earlier, I certainly welcome opportunities in the future to meet people in person. Groups like the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce offer a great platform for all of us to be involved, all of us that's involved in taking the climate action and growing our economy to have these important conversations. And I really do think the next set of engagement and actions require lots of discussions with communities because they require shifting people's purchasing decisions as well as operational decisions. So I very much look forward to working with you all to shape the Commonwealth clean energy future. We are continuing to make significant progress in safeguarding Massachusetts' environmental resources while also taking aggressive action on climate change and preparing for its inevitable impact in our community. So I'm going to talk about what in a climate space sort of mitigation, how do we mitigate the impact of, how do we change the way we work and the way we live our lives to minimize the impact of climate. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the vulnerabilities associated with our communities and how do we build more resilient communities and infrastructure. So before I begin discussing the progress we have made in recent months, this slide, I want to reiterate how important safety and reliability of our gas pipeline system is to the state and highlight the progress we have made since 2018. As you all know, the 2018 explosions were devastating and it impacted thousands of families and businesses in this region. Last October in 2020, the Department of Public Utilities issued an order approving a settlement agreement under which Columbia Gas of Massachusetts paid $56 million for its role in the gas explosions. And the agreement also, that was approved by the Department of Public Utilities, required them to sell their assets to Eversource Energy. This agreement ensured that Columbia Gas will exit the business in Massachusetts and we invest millions of dollars in the Merrimack Valleys, especially targeting equity and energy efficiency. Now, also following that, last November, the funds secured through this agreement were directed toward debt relief to thousands of low-income gas customers across the prior Columbia Gas service territories. The remaining funds are now being directed toward a Merrimack Valley Renewal Fund, which is providing clean energy programs and grants to residents, businesses, and the municipalities in Andover, North Andover, and Lawrence. As part of the settlement, Eversource is implementing several, which is the new owner, is implementing several other important measures, including continuing the 3-year energy efficiency plan savings program, implementing 2 heat pump pilot programs, and providing at no cost special weatherization service through 2021 to the 3 affected communities. While we realize we're completely unable to make up for the disruption to the lives of thousands and the life that was lost, these funds are going toward to rebuilding a better, cleaner energy system for families in the Merrimack Valley. Next slide, please. I want to turn now to my office recently completed 2050 roadmap. We call it the 2050 Decarbonization Roadmap, which will really serve as the framework for the Commonwealth energy and climate agenda in the decades ahead. It is for the first time, really, we pulled together a deep and detailed analysis of the various different sectors of the economy and how do we decarbonize for the future. But this target, of course, to set us on the right course to combat climate change, in January of last year, 2020, Governor Baker set an aggressive target for Massachusetts to achieve a net zero emissions by 2050. Now, this target is consistent with where the science says we need to be. And while it is what the science says we need to be, it's an ambitious target. And we know that we actually need all the tools in our toolbox to get there. And it is a challenge. It's not going to be easy or simple, but we're up to the task. This is why EEA, my office, Energy Environmental Affairs, engaged in a comprehensive science-based roadmap process to map out the pathways or the potential pathways available to achieve this net zero by 2050. The report, which is pictured here on the slide on the left here, is the combination of 2 years of science-based analysis using the best models and the analytical tools available to explore in detail what steps the Commonwealth and the region, really the New England region, need to take to achieve our goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, but while maintaining a healthy, equitable, and thriving economy in Massachusetts. This is not going to be simple or easy, but after the long analysis, we do believe that we can achieve this goal. The long-range analysis formed the basis also of our effort for the next decade, because what we recognize, and I think you'll see this globally and certainly across several jurisdictions in the US, we recognize there's, some people have identified this as a shift even in the last few years. And I think what's happening is we recognize that we need to achieve very substantial goals in 2050, and 2050 was always seemed so far out that seems like we could wait for decades to do anything really. But I think what we recognize in the last 3 to 5 years is that it turns out 2050 is not that far out when one starts to think about what we need to do, what we need to accomplish. So we are using this long-range analysis to form the basis of our efforts for this first decade. And we really now recognize that this decade is a decade of action, because having a 10-year plan, sort of, I'll call it the near-term plan, will maximize our ability to achieve the net zero in 2050, and the policies and the strategy we need to achieve in the 2020s, in this decade, will enable a sustained and continual reduction of emissions for the next 30 years. So it is, I think, for once, we've now recognized that we can't wait till 2040 for action. We actually need to act now. After analyzing multiple pathways to net zero, we believe that Massachusetts has the ability to achieve this goal. And if we're smart about our approach and really carefully select the strategies, we can do so affordably while maintaining a thriving economy. And I think you hear this, I'll just call it narrative now at the national level. I think what we want is to have the economy recover with a recognition that we have to shift to a cleaner energy system and economy, while creating jobs, and meaningful jobs, and well-paying jobs for the nation, but also for the Commonwealth. Our analysis found that in many of the pathways we examined, the 2050 roadmap determined that with smart choices, we're actually not going to pay more than if we did nothing and then waited to 2050 to do something to achieve that net zero emissions. So looking back and looking at this multiple pathway analysis and keeping, we want to keep our options open, because we recognize that some newer technologies, either today or in the future, will actually be able to help us. So we want to make sure we keep our options open. But at the same time, we also found some foundational foundational conclusions in the analysis, which are most cost-effective and low-risk ways to achieve the net zero in the future. And those include a balanced, clean energy portfolio, and really for Massachusetts, anchored by significant amount of offshore wind resources. So I think if you go back to the analysis of the 2050 analysis and then look at our the 10-year 2030 analysis, you'll find that we are bullish and working really hard to build up an offshore wind industry. We need more interstate transmission because we need diversity in the resources that we acquire. So it's not going to be only about offshore wind or solar, but also other clean energy technologies, including hydro imports from our neighboring states and Canada. Widespread electrification, the third target is, and path is widespread electrification of transportation and buildings, building heat, and plug into that clean energy generation that we will create, and reducing costs by replacing energy infrastructure when it is up for replacement. Next slide, please. I want to spend a little bit of time on offshore wind because it is while the Merrimack Valley is only partially on the coast, this offshore wind industry really affects the entire Massachusetts and really the East Coast, as well as the West Coast, but primarily on the East Coast right now, focused on offshore wind. The roadmap showed that to meet our goal for net zero emissions in 2050, we're going to need to bring a significant amount of offshore wind online, at least 15 gigawatts by 2050. And that is a significant amount of deployment, capital investment. And of course, my office and I have been working with neighboring states that, as you probably know from trade press, that also have ambitious targets for offshore wind. So we are working with our sister states to talk about how to collaborate and to think about a strategy for United States. And as you heard from the Biden administration, the Biden administration is aiming for 30 gigawatts over the next decade. And to do that, we really need domestic, US-based manufacturing and services. So we think that, first of all, we're bullish on offshore wind. And finally, we really think this is going to take off. And we believe that building an industry really requires all of the support, supply chain, as well as full manufacturing in the United States for this sector. To meet our 2030 goal, it's critical that we build and interconnect our current 2 projects. We have already procured and contracted 2 projects, and they are important to setting the Commonwealth on the path to meet these long-term goals. And the first project will be the first large-scale, utility-scale offshore wind project in the United States, off the shore of the United States. Of course, a little bit more about this. We now are engaged with the federal government and have been engaged in the federal government. And we're pleased that in March, the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management finalized the environmental impact statement for the Vineyard Wind project, which is the first project, putting the project on a path to complete the federal permitting process and toward construction. And I'm fingers crossed, we are looking forward to sort of the final approval from the federal government on that project. At this point, the Vineyard Wind, which is an 800 megawatt project, will begin operations, begin operations in 2023. And the following project is another 804 megawatt developed by Mayflower Wind, expected for 2025. Meanwhile, the administration is working with our electric utilities, some of them you will hear from today, to procure additional 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind, which will bring our total contracted resource to 3,200 megawatt, which is a significant investment in this technology, but also industry. The RFP for the 1,600 megawatt is currently waiting for approval at the Department of Public Utilities, and we anticipate that we would roll that out in the coming days. This procurement is double in size of the previous individual 800 megawatts, which will give us, a unique opportunity. The allowance for larger size bids is intended to allow bidders to potentially capture efficiencies related to transmission cabling and the use of onshore interconnection points. The RFP is also the result of an extensive stakeholder engagement process, which led to some very important changes from the prior RFPs. For the first time, we are requiring bidders to submit diversity, equity, and inclusion plans that include workforce diversity plan and supplier diversity work plan, program plan. We believe that to, again, build this industry as well as other clean energy industries, we need to include, we need to place a lens on diversity and inclusion and equity in really everything we do. So this plan will outline the bidder's commitment to promote employment, procurement, and contracting opportunities for minority, women, veterans, LGBT communities, and people with disabilities. The bidders, of course, we look forward to the bidders' plans as part of this RFP. We are also asking the bidders to submit a strategic plan that track and report on the status of environmental justice impact, engagement, and employment, including training, recruiting, and hiring opportunities. And I'm really using offshore wind as an example. One of the things that we're fully on, sort of full force forward is working with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center on labor and workforce training, really for all of the clean energy future. Again, offshore wind is an example, but there are other buildings and retrofitting. We really need to build up our labor force, which of course is already quite advanced, but some of these newer technologies and newer work will require newer methods and training. We also hope that the economic benefits associated with this offshore wind will bring on new types of commitments that will include, within the proposals from bidders, workforce development, local supply chain, and research and innovation. Next slide. I want to turn your attention a little bit to the climate bill. I want to highlight that the recent climate bill, one of the most ambitious pieces of climate legislation in the country, was truly a collaborative effort from the governor's office and our administration, as well as the legislators. On March 26th this year, the Commonwealth, when, is a historic day really for the Commonwealth, when Governor Baker signed the comprehensive nation-leading climate change legislation into law, cementing our prior commitment, but also changed and really made Massachusetts a national leader on climate change and combating climate change. The Baker-Polito administration and the legislature created a bill that will set the Commonwealth on a path for net zero in 2050 through bold, equitable, and aggressive action while protecting the state's economy and most vulnerable residents. Of course, they have this was done through a long, productive partnership on issues related to climate change. Under this new legislation, my office will be conducting some new planning activities. Just to give you a sense, we have already spent the last year and 2 years, as I talked about the roadmap analysis, which is a 2050 analysis. We then spent the last year working on the 2030 plan to set a goal for 2030. With this new legislation, we will be updating that clean energy climate plan, and we're going to do that for 2025 and 2030 to align ourselves with the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is updated through the legislation within the current legislation. We will be developing a plan and timeline for that clean energy climate plan, including and ensuring that we will provide additional opportunities for engagement with stakeholders and members of the public. I think I want just emphasize that as far as all of my colleagues engaged in this work, we really believe that climate change is not a partisan issue. So I think I feel very lucky to be living in Massachusetts, where we can really talk about the activities that we need to take on and the challenges we need to face and all the work we need to do in the next decade and beyond to take actions against this. We know that the impact we're seeing here in the Commonwealth on our coasts, to our fisheries, to our family farms and communities are not political, and the science on the problem is clear. In this past year, while the pandemic was being managed, we also had been hard at work on a number of climate-related initiatives, particularly in advancing the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program that helped fund many cities and towns projects that will reduce the impact of climate change on our communities. So earlier I talked about what we need to do to reduce the potential emissions from our economies. But at the same time, we also need to work on how to adapt our economies and our communities to the effect of climate change. Specifically in the Merrimack Valley, we have invested in many communities, and I want to highlight two here this morning. Next slide, please. The Haverhill River Dam removal through this MVP program. The Haverhill River Dam has been seen as a liability. Thus, with the funding from this MVP program, the city will conduct a reliability study for the removal of the dam and to revitalize the area. The removal of the dam will allow flood water to flow more freely in the area. I understand that one of the economic benefits of the project involves the ability to revitalize the adjacent mill building once the dam is removed and no longer a liability. And another one I want to highlight in the next slide is Newburyport Shoreline Resiliency project. if you can advance the slide, please. This project is in the construction phase of, I believe, a 3-phase project of rebuilding a higher slopestone revetment and installation of elevated berm with a public trail on top. I understand this is a critical step toward making the Newburyport wastewater treatment plant resilient to storm surges and future sea level rise. And really, along with protecting the underground electric transmission lines serving the city and the region. And these are just 2 examples of the MVP program that our agency is working across the state to help rebuild or build the communities that need these to protect our cities and towns from from the potential harms of climate change activities. So there are, I will just say the demand for this kind of assistance and to analyze what kind of projects and to make the investments in the capital projects are tremendous. I think this program has much more demand that we have money for, but we're working in the, with the executive branch as well as the legislative branch to think about how to advance more of these kind of assistance. Back to the climate bill, if you can go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about several branches or several pillars of this. We have codified into law the commitment to the net zero by 2050. We also have accomplished through this legislation an increase in our authorization to solicit additional 2,400 megawatts of offshore wind that I talked about earlier, that we were already on the path of developing, but the legislature and the legislation gave us additional authorization. There's something that we haven't talked about yet too much, but I'm certainly, will engage more, is that we will need to make our appliances more energy efficient and allow municipalities to opt into highly energy efficient stretch code for newly constructed buildings. This is something that our administration with the Department of Energy Resources will be working on in the next couple of years. It will include new nation-leading provisions that will help us protect our environmental justice communities, including for the first time requiring the Department of Environmental Protection to develop regulations to assess cumulative impacts as part of permitting process for certain energy projects. And one of the major components of the bill advances, as I mentioned earlier, the 2030 Clean Energy Climate Plan by authorizing the Department of Energy Resources to develop new, highly efficient energy stretch code that will support the development of high quality, affordable housing in the Commonwealth and help us meet our long-term efficiency emissions reduction goal while keeping the home ownership within reach. So we have seen tremendous progress even in the recent weeks and a lot of positive momentum, particularly with our offshore wind projects, culminating with BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, completing its environmental review on the Vineyard Wind, and hopefully putting that project on track to complete the federal permitting process in the coming months. So I believe that the climate bill has really allowed us to continue to build on that positive momentum in the Commonwealth clean energy leadership. So we will be working really hard and look forward to continue building on our climate efforts and to put this legislation into action. So with that, I just want to say that I look forward to our continued partnership with the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce and all of the communities associated with that. Thank you very much for having me today, and I look forward to any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Chang. We appreciate you taking the time out of schedule for that great presentation and for the great work that you and your staff are putting forward to the state of Massachusetts in terms of energy and environmental affairs. We do have some time for a couple questions before we turn over to our next speaker. So if you have any, you can just unmute yourself or put it in the chat and we will ask that. And while we wait for that, I just want to mention that the Merrimack Valley Chamber also has over 100 annual events and programs each and every year. Our next opportunity for a conference will be June 23rd. It's going to be an economic development conference with Secretary Mike Keneally at 12 noon. The location is still to be determined, but it will be in person. Again, that's June 23rd with Secretary Mike Keneally for our economic development conference. And if there's no questions.
Michael, why don't you also mention before we go to our next speaker, that the Chamber is actively exploring the possibility of doing a virtual, very extensive job fair for those companies that are looking for employees. It appears that's something that we've been working on. Rayanne has worked with Michael on a great new platform that we use very successfully with our Business Expo, where you literally thought you were sitting next door to the person live in person, although it was virtual. So we're going to be talking to some more people about that. But please stay tuned. And if you have an interest in participating in the job fair, just send Michael or Rayanne a quick email. It's something that we think we need to do because every company we've spoken to has indicated the same concern that they're not able to find employees. And to the Undersecretary, I just want you to know that I had the opportunity to visit the wind farm in Block Island in Rhode Island. And it's absolutely amazing what's out there with these wind turbines. And it was absolutely a spectacular day to visit and to learn about the opportunities to generate offshore energy.
We did have one question come in. It's from a Kate, and she says, you referred to a highly energy efficient stretch code rather than a net zero stretch code. What do you see as the benefits of not going to a net zero stretch code?
Good question. I think the legislation required us to define net zero code. And our offices are actually working on that to actually, first we have to define what that means. And the way I think about this is for all new buildings, we need to get the building envelope as tight as possible. And if anybody is in the sort of the building and real estate business, I think it'll be really worth understanding what I call passive house and the industry calls passive house, when we really tighten the energy, the envelope of a building, so that I think of that as a sort of a no regret strategy, because no matter what sources of heating or cooling we might use in the future, we need to build buildings that are highly efficient. So I do think whether it's net zero or highly efficient, we're all heading toward a net zero. I think the question is about the pace of change. And I do believe that having a super efficient envelope of a building is the first no regrets strategy. And then there's, as you probably know, there's quite a bit of discussion around, well, what sources of fuel do we use for heating? And, I can go on for a long time about that. I'll just say this, I think there is a shift in the way we think about energy usage. To get to net zero, we have to essentially net zero. That means no emissions, no emissions from burning of fossil fuel. So that's 2050, but the path to get there is not simple. I think we need to capitalize on the technologies we have today to transition, but we also need to leave room for opportunities in the future. So I absolutely believe that we need to advance our energy efficiency and code for buildings, but can we get to net zero, meaning, banning of all fossil fuel right away? I think we need to leave those options on the table so that consumers have choices.
Thank you very much. Looks like one more question here. Thank you from Susan. She says, thank you, Judy, for your great presentation. We're excited about equitable workforce development to sustain offshore wind in Massachusetts. Can you talk a bit about opportunities for workforce development in the trades on offshore wind outside of New Bedford area? Oh, Undersecretary, your mic's muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's also a really good question. As I mentioned briefly, the Clean Energy Center, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, is working with a variety of educational institutions to build up curriculum for training workforce, not just offshore wind, but certainly offshore wind is one major component. So while New Bedford is one of the ideal locations to reach our lease areas south of the Cape, the workforce opportunity is really, I'll say, statewide and region-wide. I think we need to capitalize on Massachusetts' leadership in training and education, and not only train our own workforce, but train the workforce of the East Coast for offshore wind. So the way I think about it, representing the state, we see this as an opportunity for the state. Certainly, some regional value will be present because of their vicinity to the locations. So I definitely believe that all of the colleges and universities will be gearing up and working with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to think about the pathways to having a career in offshore wind, as well as other clean energy technologies and industries.
Thank you very much. And with that being said, I'd just like to thank Undersecretary Judy Chang again for joining us this morning. We appreciate you being part of the program. We appreciate all the great work you're putting forward towards energy and environmental affairs for the state of Massachusetts. And we look forward to having you back again. So thank you again, and we appreciate you joining us. With that being said, we'll move on to our next speaker. Roger, I'd like to introduce Roger A. Craninberg, who's the Vice President for Energy Strategy and Policy for Eversource. Welcome, Roger. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for having me. Thank you to the Undersecretary for her comments, and to the administration and legislation for the recent work. It's some pretty amazing stuff, both in the roadmap to 2050, the commitment to 2030. If I remember rightly, Judy, it's 50% down. It was kind of moving around for a while. I think that's very, very important because, as you pointed out, that gets us on a pathway for success by 2050. And I think that's really, really key. In prior lives, one of the things that we worried about is you set a target, for example, 2030. You get to that target, but then you pre-position yourself for failure for where you ultimately want to get to. It's a little bit like driving down the road. You get to your initial destination, but there's no way you can get to your final destination because you're way off path. So hats off and compliments to that. The other thing I wanted to sort of touch on is energy efficiency. I mean, that's an absolute. I think those in terms of the region being what I'd call fossil energy limited. I'm very careful with the words, but essentially what that means is we don't really have fossil energy resources within the region. We bring it to the region. And in the coldest days of winter, it's hard to get all the energy we need here to keep people warm. For a little bit of context, I grew up in Texas, and I live in the Boston area now. And one of the things that I highlight significantly in Texas, safety and health, is summer heat. In New England, safety and health is the winter cold. And I start from there. That's a foundational need for humanity, right? To be safe and healthy. And that's also one of the things that came up when we acquired the Columbia Gas assets. And we've made a commitment internally to be carbon neutral by 2050. And I can speak about that a little bit more. And we see ourselves as a key partner and catalyst in getting to carbon neutral by 2050. And one of the questions we got, justly so, especially from investors, is how does this square with you buying Columbia Gas? And we think it does. We think it absolutely does because of our commitment to the community. And again, safety and health. Those are sort of key foundational needs of a community. And that the Merrimack Valley community deserves safety and health. both short term as well as long term, and longer term being staying warm, staying healthy, etc. So I just wanted to start off with that in terms of context, and then sort of secondary. I know Chamber represents business, but somewhat secondary to safety and health is economic well-being, economic vibrancy, and in that we see reliability and resiliency as being really, really key to economic activity, especially economic activity in this region. And I will paraphrase because I can't remember exactly what he said. Bill Gates in his CERAWeek address, he said, electricity is only valuable if it's absolutely reliable. And corollary to that is resilient. And what I mean by resilient is, you see this in cybersecurity. When things happen, and things will happen that you can't predict, for example, the pandemic. If anyone had predicted the pandemic, you would have been seen as a crazy. So no one really could have predicted the pandemic to the extent, well, maybe a few people did, but in essence, you've got to be able to respond and adapt to uncertainty. And in resiliency for the energy system, one of the key tools that any system has seen over time is diversity of supply, diversity of transportation. So those are essential in maintaining both reliability as well as resiliency. And the reason I touch on resiliency a bit is much of the backup generation in this region and many parts of the country depends on the gas distribution system. We're going to get to, and we will get to, in my opinion, carbon neutral by 2050, we've got to figure out how to evolve that system, evolve the use of that system. I think of my telecom experience. What got us broadband was not putting fiber to every home. What got us broadband was leveraging a 100-year-old twisted copper pair that was put in for a telephone service. The other thing I think of is the regrets the society has about ripping out rail systems, urban rail systems. One of the things you see with big transportation systems is the last mile distribution part of the system is really hard to do and it's really valuable. If you look at phone service, when you pick up your phone and you make a phone call on your cell phone, most of what you're paying for is that wireless connection. The days of us wringing our hands about long distance are long gone. Long distance is essentially zero cost, zero per unit cost. So that last mile connectivity and system is really key when you're looking at any transportation system. So back up a little bit and get a little bit to concrete about carbon neutral by 2050. We see ourselves absolutely as a catalyst and a partner in achieving that. Some of the things I said about heat, I think heat's probably one of the toughest challenges for this region. Last week I was on a panel, chair and commission, FERC commission-led panel on electrification. And the chair asked one of the questions of, what does it look like when regions move from a summer peak to a winter peak? And what I told him is, look at New England. New England will be on the forefront of that, and New England will be on the forefront of figuring out how that all works, because we are a cold region with cold snaps. We're not California, we're not Texas. And by the way, the background is a strong rivalry between Texas and California that goes way back. So it's kind of a little bit of fun too. And Pedro Pizarro from SoCal Edison was on as well. And he said, yeah, look at Roger's region. He's got to deal with the cold snaps. We've got to deal with different things. And I highlight it because heat is a really significant challenge and unique challenge for this region compared to anywhere else in the US. And for leadership on that, where I look towards is what's going on in Europe, specifically Northern Europe. They have similar challenges. They have similar population densities, diversity, and a lot of things that we talk about. One of the easier ones, and by the way, to Judy's point, none of this is super easy, but there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of really great things that have to be done. And going back to something that Richard Haas said in his book and Dan Jurgen said in his, this is the opportunity and the challenge of our lifetime. And these are massive changes and transitions and transformations. And I focus more on how invigorating this is, all the stuff that has to get done, and all the advantages this region has, both in terms of intellectual institutions, education, but also technology. Some of the questions that Judy got about offshore wind. I grew up in Texas, and the Gulf Coast saw quite a revival from offshore oil and gas. And then that played out. And it wasn't just offshore jobs. It was a lot of onshore jobs. It was jobs of all levels. It was a huge economic revitalization of the whole Gulf Coast, from South Texas all the way through Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. The whole region saw a big economic uplift at all levels from that renaissance. So, we're big on offshore wind. We have a joint venture with Ørsted. We see it as the resource for the region going forward of any sort, fossil or not fossil. Offshore wind is such a great resource for the region. The other one is solar. Judy didn't mention this, but within that bill, we got the authorization to build 280 megawatts per operating company of solar. But there's a key caveat on that. We have on us to engage with the communities, then demonstrate what the community benefit is. And what that means is it's accepting the value of solar at a distributed level that has a lot of community value. Community value could be things like a microgrid. We're building a battery in Provincetown, which is essentially a microgrid. It backs up the entire town. It islands the town and backs up the entire town. Globally unique, by the way. I have not found another facility like that anywhere in the world of that size. But those are kind of the skills that you need, an entity like ourselves, a utility, to put all the pieces together, all the coordination. If there is a big storm, we've got access through mutual aid to crews from literally all over North America. Now, those are things that we can bring to the community and to society. And that's why I think legislature said, okay, go forward, we'll give you permission to do that. But by the way, you've got the onus to demonstrate the value to the community in doing this. EVs, I'm a big proponent of EVs. I would make the argument that that market has taken off. The public will probably get deeper appreciation of that, and by 2025 is kind of a magical year that I use. And the forefront has been with consumer-owned vehicles. But looking down the pipeline, fleets will be a significant part of that, and fleets will transition very rapidly, in my opinion, because it's driven by business decisions as opposed to consumer decisions. I mentioned batteries, I mentioned heat. I'm going down my list to make sure I don't miss anything significant. Let me touch a little bit on our internal commitment, our company commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030. I can share with you that was tough to get through a company. That's a pretty strong commitment. There's no commitment that soon of that magnitude, of that level within the industry. Most of the commitments tend to go out to 2040, 2050. Making a commitment to be carbon neutral for an energy company by 2030 is a huge commitment. All that stuff, it's obvious, the benefits for the environment, but the community benefits are huge, because to do that, we have to decarbonize our fleets, and we have significant fleets. We have to decarbonize our buildings, and then you've got the other stuff that's more industry specific, like the losses on the electric lines, etc. But in doing just the fleets and the buildings for a company of our size and scale, that solution, and it's New England specific, by the way, is then available to the entire community. It's kind of what I call the Walmart effect. A lot of folks in the industry, didn't have the scale of Walmart, so they would literally tell their vendors, just do whatever Walmart did. I don't have the time and resources to think this through. They did, just do what they did. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit of what's going on within the region, within our company, And the opportunities this presents to the region, and to be quite frank, I've got 2 kids, to our kids and their generations to come. I think it's a huge opportunity. And again, hats off to the administration, legislators in taking a leadership role within the country and globally, and making some very concrete and strong commitments. And quite frankly, pushing companies like ourselves to be in there, to engage, and to get this done.
Thank you, Roger. We appreciate you joining us today. I'd like to thank Eversource again. They're new to the Merrimack Valley, but you already have a strong footprint on adaptability, as you mentioned, safety and health right here in the Merrimack Valley, and we look forward to working with you in the future as well. So thank you again for joining us today. I'd like to turn over to we're going to hold off questions for our 3 speakers to the end. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Joe Muraco, who is the lead program manager, community customer management for National Grid. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Michael. I'd like to share my screen. I think they're going to have to enable me to share it. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event, for the Undersecretary Chang to be here, and Roger from Eversource and Revision Energy. I think these kind of forums are going to be key to our ability to be successful as we enable the clean energy transition. So let me see if I can share my slides here.
I made you co-host, so you should be all set.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Can everybody see my screen? I'll take that as a yes. No?
Yep, we're good, Joe.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. So National Grid is determined to advance Massachusetts climate objectives. We're focusing on increasing the renewable electric supplies, energy storage, demand response, and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And what I have on this slide really equates to the 4 pillars that are of our clean energy promise to meet that goal for Massachusetts' net zero by 2050. Firstly, we need to take a look at our electric grid, and we need to modernize it. You may not realize that the grid that we have in place today is very similar to the one that was installed by Edison and Westinghouse over 100 years ago. And for the last 100 years, that has worked perfectly. But our needs as a society are changing, and we need to be able to change with it and to implement some of the technology that'll help us make that transition. So from a grid modernization perspective, we're looking at installing sensing equipment where we can get a better idea of how renewable energy is interacting with our grid and to make sure it's delivering value for all of our customers. We're looking at advanced metering equipment. It's something we did a pilot of in Worcester, where a typical electric meter cannot see exactly when and how a customer is using the energy. It's just an aggregate at the end of the month when we read it. Advanced metering infrastructure will allow us to help customers understand their usage better and even be more efficient with the time that they're using this, which is going to be crucial when it gets to electric vehicle charging stations. The second pillar of our energy promise revolves around renewable energy integration. So incorporating this infrastructure such as wind and solar, as well as energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is the most simple way to reduce your carbon footprint, simply by using less electric or gas. And we've, in Massachusetts, traditionally been #1 in the nation for our energy efficiency program. So whether it's your home or your business, if you're not utilizing these programs, I encourage you to do so. They are incorporated into your electric bill, so you are paying for them, and they deliver a tremendous amount of value for all of our customers. So I do, at the end of the presentation, have a few slides with some web links where you can go and get information on those programs. The third one is a big one. Roger just mentioned it, and it's the electrification of the transportation sector. In New England, roughly 40% of emissions come from the transportation sector. We believe there's a huge opportunity to help electrify Massachusetts vehicles. We have a very generous electric vehicle charging incentive program, where we incentivize up to 80 or 90%, depending on the type of charger and where you're putting it, for charging infrastructure that is publicly accessible. And we're also currently working on a fleet advisory program where we meet with municipalities and discuss opportunities where they can electrify their fleets and reduce their usage, as well as save money. The last one is around our gas networks and heating. 60% of homes in New England are heated with natural gas. We believe that the natural gas infrastructure that we have in place in the state is going to play an integral part in a clean energy future. However, what is in those pipes may change. We're looking at implementing more renewable natural gas, which is natural gas that's derived from food waste or animal waste, as well as potential for hydrogen blending. We're going to be looking at that in the near future and doing some pilots with university campuses where we can see what kind of impact that may have on our system, as well as people's devices or boilers and the such. Also, we're looking closely at geothermal district heating options. And is that a good opportunity for us to get in to an area, install wells, connect the local residents and businesses to those wells, reducing their cost upfront for geothermal, and then billing them more on a utility scale. So that's something we're hoping to pilot in the near future as well, to get a sense of how would that work in Massachusetts, especially in more urban areas where it can be difficult due to space constraints. I mentioned electric vehicle charging stations, and I want to talk a little bit about that, what that looks like locally. So in Massachusetts, we've installed 550 charging stations with 1,060 ports. More importantly, in the Merrimack Valley alone, we've incentivized the installation, of 120 stations with 233 individual ports. By Merrimack Valley, I mean Westford to Newburyport. We have about 261,000 electric customers in that region. About 31,000 of them are commercial. In this picture below, although not in the Merrimack Valley itself, it's in Melrose, Massachusetts. That is something that we've just piloted, the first of its kind. It's a pole-mounted electric vehicle charging station. It's a really interesting technology where we will actually, the pole-mounted station is about 10 feet off the ground. And if someone wants to use it, they come and they scan a QR code at the base of the pole. It lowers the charging plug so they can plug in, and when they're done, it'll actually go back up into the pole so it's out of the way of pedestrians or plows. And we think it's a great opportunity to utilize some of the existing infrastructure we have in place for new purposes that are going to help with the clean energy transition. Caveat on this as well, we found it's about 70% cheaper if you install them this way than a traditional ground-mounted station where you have to trench and install the underground conduit. So there's an opportunity to be more efficient with our incentives as well. So distributed generation, some places call it distributed energy resources, but this is things like solar and wind. And National Grid in our territory, Massachusetts, has connected slightly more than 1,600 megawatts, and that represents about almost 64,000 individual systems. In the Merrimack Valley itself, we're just under 12,000 individual systems, totaling nearly 200 megawatts. I think the exact number is 195. A couple of interesting side points to that. Methuen, Lowell, and Lawrence are all in the top 10 in terms of number of systems that were implemented. And then Haverhill and Billerica are, I think, 12th and 14th in terms of the total nameplate capacity of the system. So 22 megawatts were installed in Haverhill and 21 in Billerica. And that is a pattern we see across the state of Massachusetts, where areas with larger landmass with open space tend to see a smaller number of systems, but a higher total nameplate capacity because they install larger arrays. And cities and towns tend to have a larger amount of smaller systems on the individual buildings and houses. And it's something that we have to be cognizant of as we manage the implementation of these, because there tends to be a large amount of systems installed in places where the energy is not necessarily needed, which can cause issues on the grid. And that's something as part of our grid modernization plan we're working on with developers as well to try to solve some of these complex issues. I'm going to end with a couple slides. I'm not going to go through these, but I wasn't sure if Joe was going to share. Joe and Mike were going to share this with anybody. These are links to the programs that I mentioned. We have programs for small and large business, for new construction, electric vehicle charging stations, crucial one. If you're going to be, if you have a building or you're going to be building a development, please reach out. And that's something we really need to put in the ground. We need to have those systems out there so that people can utilize them, and demand response as well. And finally, residential customers, if you haven't gotten a home energy audit through Mass Save, please do so. It's crucially important, and it will help us save both energy and it'll help you save money on your electric bill or gas bill. With that said, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm happy to work with anybody directly if you have questions or concerns or just want to continue the conversation. You can reach out to Joe Bevilacqua or Mike at the chamber. I'm sure they'll give out my information. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate that. We appreciate National Grid being an annual supporter of this program and always taking a leadership stance in energy and environmental affairs. And yes, if you share us those slides, we'll make sure to send that out to the attendees from today as well. So we appreciate that, Joe. With that being said, I'd like to move on to our last speaker of the day from Revise Inc. Revise Inc. is a great company right here located in the Merrimack Valley. And we have Matt Hammer, who's the Director of Operations for Revise Inc. speaking today. So welcome, Matt, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks. I'll just take a couple of minutes here. You know, Revise was very happy to be a sponsor of this conference. It's right in line with our mission and our goals of bringing energy efficiency to you know, to the micro level. A lot of what Undersecretary Peng was talking about is, you know, really lofty policy goals, which we're incredibly supportive of and pushing towards being net zero in the Commonwealth in 30 years. And a lot of what Revise focuses on specifically is how can we make energy efficiency as accessible as possible for everyday folks. The gentleman from Joe from National Grid specifically mentioned it. I think Roger did too, about participating in the Mass Save program. It really is. It's a leading energy efficiency program sponsored by the big utility providers. And it's really it's a model that is really doesn't have many comparisons across the country as far as helping to push the state towards energy efficiency. So what we do as a company is we're a Mass Save partner, meaning we conduct residential energy assessments at the small scale, mostly single family homes or small low-rise multifamilies. The Mass Save program does have options for folks that live in larger multifamily associations, condo developments. There's business options. If anyone on here is not familiar with it, I highly recommend checking out the website. If you haven't had an energy assessment yet, Revise would be happy to do that for you. But even if you work with any contractor, you're going to get a great service and take advantage of some excellent incentives to help make your home more energy efficient. Just a little background on us regarding we're located here in Haverhill. As Michael said, we performed a few thousand audits in the Merrimack Valley over the last 5 years, about 25,000 across the state. And of all those energy assessments, you know, the assessments cost folks nothing to have. It's paid for every month on their utility bills through a little energy efficiency charge, and that helps pay for it. And that unlocks a lot of benefits to folks, right? So as far as improving the efficiency of the home, we're really focusing on tightening the thermal envelope of the home, looking at the insulation, air leakage, and we will make a comprehensive set of recommendations for you to take advantage of the incentives that are available. The utilities do and the Mass Save program picks up the bulk of the cost of that retrofit work. Massachusetts has the oldest housing stock in the country, and it's amazing how many homes here are still without any insulation, let alone all the ones that are under insulated, not up to today's standards. So as we push forward, towards carbon neutrality, decarbonization, using cleaner fuels and improved technology is excellent. If you have the most efficient heating system in the world in your home, but you don't have properly insulated walls or your attic's not properly sealed, it doesn't do you a lot of good. It all goes hand in hand. And the program is really good at addressing all of these through rebates and instant savings measures as well. So again, this is a Chamber of Commerce event, so just a few business statistics. We participate in this program and are fortunate to do so. And it revises 135 employees. There are so many folks that are employed through the Mass Save program across the state. It really makes a big difference out there from that standpoint as well. We have lots of community partnerships. We've installed our efforts in working with Mothers Out Front, the town of Bedford, the city of Haverhill. We try to get as much outreach as possible into specifically underserved areas, and bring the energy efficiency message to as many people as possible. And that's really all I have. I just want to encourage anyone who hasn't participated in this, in the program, to do so. Like I said, your Revise would be happy to serve you, but at the end of the day, we're a mission-oriented company. We really care about energy efficiency and are really supportive of all the efforts that are going on by the utilities and by the Commonwealth. And so I'd be happy to talk energy efficiency at the micro level with anybody who wants to reach out to me. That's really all I have. If you're interested, go to callrevise.com. I think Michael will circulate my contact information afterward.
Definitely. And Matt, how much does the Mass Saves program cost someone who's interested in participating?
It costs the energy assessment is free. It doesn't cost you anything, right? So
great opportunity. So what's the website again?
www.callrevise.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for joining the program today. We appreciate Revise Inc.'s support, and I want to thank all of our speakers today, especially the Undersecretary and our additional speakers as well. I want to say thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule. I will ask, is there any questions for any of the speakers? We'll go to the questions first before we adjourn.
Michael?
Yes, Joe.
One of the things that I'm continually impressed with is the tremendous opportunities that are available through the state. And thank you, Undersecretary, and through our private utilities. Both speakers today, I think, provided us with great information, and also with the private companies that we have, such as Revise. And I just want everyone to realize that we as a chamber will be able to send this information to our members when people call us and ask about how do we make our buildings energy efficient? How do we save money? How do we conserve energy? We obviously now have resources available through you that we can pass on. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're very concerned about providing a program like this, because it not only gives us immediate access to information and to opportunities, but it also gives us a longer term vision, for example, from the state with respect to wind and energy alternatives. So I think this has been very, very helpful. I was very, very impressed once again with the quality of the presentations. I was impressed with the questions. And I think that you've given us a tremendous amount of information to be able to pass on, whether they're residential homeowners, because obviously I keep reminding everyone that when the employees of our companies go home, they're homeowners, and there are tenants or they're homeowners, and they need opportunities to conserve energy. And obviously our business owners want to conserve, because if they can conserve their energy operations, they can then invest their funds in the workforce. In workforce trading is a critical issue. You'll be hearing more about us. We're actually developing, I don't know how much I can give out, Michael, but we're actually developing a program on vocational jobs. Not everyone's destined to go to college, but we're actually going to be doing a program with respect to the opportunity for vocational jobs. And one of the things that we learned through the Chamber's Energy program was the easy transition from some of the common vocational jobs into the new opportunities in solar and wind and in power. And by the way, Undersecretary, I had an opportunity to go to Canada with the Consul General, and we visited Hydro-Quebec, and they gave us the presentation as to how the hydropower was going to be impacting in a positive way the energy opportunities here in New England. And so it's good for us to know that there is long-term vision with energy through solar, through wind, through water, and having companies right here where we can actually physically call you is really important. And I want to say thank you to Joe and Roger and Matt once again for being so good. And that's all. Michael said I've spoken too long, so I'm done. But I just want to say thank you. It really was beneficial. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you again to Undersecretary Judy Chang, Matt, Roger, Joe. And I want to just thank our sponsors again, our title sponsor, Eversource, and our program sponsors, the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce Business Program, National Grid, and Revise Inc. Again, you can find out information about all other upcoming Merrimack Valley Chamber events, webinars, and in-person events at merrimackvalleychamber.com. And make sure to follow us on social media where you'll be able to see all of our webinars and upcoming program highlights as well. And I just want to give a quick thank you also to Rianne for helping us with the PowerPoints today. So thank you to everyone. Thank you again, Undersecretary Judy Chang. We appreciate you taking the time to schedule and all of our speakers, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.